Please, ladies and gentlemen, grab a seat as we're back for the GPA Paris Summit 2021. I definitely need your attention and need you to grab a seat as we're about to enter our session, deep diving into regulation. Because yes, since yesterday, from working groups to side event formats, we've all brought the need for regulation on artificial intelligence. Now, should it be non-tech centric, have a smart regulation approach, try to better match the timing of innovation rather than constantly trying to catch up and blocking it. Ultimately, how to regulate AI to protect human dignity from its potential risks while preserving the dynamism of research and commercial innovation. That's definitely the question in which our next panel will dive from different regulation perspective across continents. And I'm definitely waiting for my guests here on stage. And it's a pleasure, of course, to greet you on this very stage. Yongzi Qin, your Assistant Chief Executive, Data Innovation and Protection Group, Info Communications Media Development Authority, Deputy Commissioner of Personal Data Protection Commission, all that in Singapore, of course. Lucilia Scioli, you're the Director of Artificial Intelligence and Digital Industry for DG Connect at the European Commission, of course, too. Ali Shah, you're the Head of Technology, Information Commissioner's Office, the ICO in the UK. Kay First-Butterfield, you're A of AI and Machine Learning, a member of the Executive Committee at the World Economic Forum. We're also joined online by Thomas Hahn, the Chief Expert Software at Siemens and President of Big Data Value Association in Germany. Hi to you, Thomas. And last but definitely not the least, we're joined by phone by Lynn Parker. Lynn, you're the National AI Initiative Office, White House Office of Science and Technology Policy in the US. And we're going to start with you, actually, because the US have been elected at GPA Steering Committee, and you do all the US chair. Lynn, can you hear us?
Hi, good day. Yes, it's extremely hard for me to hear.
Okay. If you want actually to dive into your opening remarks, it will be lovely to hear from you, actually.
Absolutely, and thank you so much. It's an honor to participate in this panel, and thank you so much for your flexibility in the scheduling. I think most of us would agree that artificial intelligence has become one of the most impactful technologies of the 21st century and provides opportunities and challenges in nearly every sector of society. Our goal in the United States is to develop and share a compelling approach for how to use AI technologies in a way that serves our people, protects our interests, and upholds our values. So to help pursue this goal, the United States launched the National AI Initiative in January of this year. And this initiative has 4 key objectives. First, we want to ensure continued U.S. leadership in AI research and development. Second, we aim for the United States to lead the world in the development and use of trustworthy AI systems in the public and private sectors. Third, we must prepare the present and future U.S. workforce for the integration of AI systems across all sectors of the economy and society. And finally, our 4th goal is to coordinate AI research, development, and demonstration activities among federal agencies. So one of these objectives, advancing trustworthy AI, requires a multifaceted approach that includes research and development investments that address key technical challenges, the development of metrics, standards, and assessment tools to measure and evaluate AI trustworthiness, engagement in the development of AI technical standards, and governance approaches for the use of AI in the public and private sectors, and of course, preparing a diverse and inclusive workforce for the jobs of today and the future. So in terms of regulation, we're pursuing a regulatory approach to AI that is risk-based and use case specific, focused on maximizing the benefits of AI while ensuring non-discrimination, fairness, equity, and safety in its use. When we think about AI regulation, it's important to consider it in a broader context in terms of what already exists. The United States has long been a champion and defender of the core values of freedom, guarantees of human rights, the rule of law, stability in our institutions, rights to privacy, civil rights and civil liberties, respect for intellectual property, and opportunities for all to pursue their dreams. Because of this, we already have a robust legal system in place that provides a number of protections to our people, regardless of whether a system includes AI or not. However, there are indeed additional guardrails that are needed for certain use cases of AI. In all of our efforts on AI, the United States believes it remains critical that like-minded countries work together to promote the responsible use of AI. The United States continues to value collaborations with international partners to ensure that advances in AI are used to improve quality of life and national and economic security, and certainly not to suppress dissent or target minority communities.
Lynn, if you can still hear us, I do have just one question, and then we'll literally let you go because I know you have to run to a steering committee. But I just wanted to make sure and clear with you here that a National Institute for Science and Technology is definitely developing an AI risk management framework. So how would it fit actually on this UA approach on AI regulation that you've just described?
So there seems to be a growing consensus on the importance of a risk-based approach to AI governance. And of course, that it seeks to maximize the benefits of AI in our societies while ensuring that AI is always used in an appropriate manner. But an open question is how we turn the concept of a risk-based approach into practice. So to address this issue, and as part of our National AI Initiative, our National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, is leading a consensus-driven, open, transparent, and collaborative process to develop an AI risk management framework. This risk management framework aims to provide an approach to better manage AI-related risks to individuals, to organizations, and society, and improve the ability to incorporate trustworthiness considerations into the design, development, use, and evaluation of AI products, services, and systems. Throughout the process of developing this AI risk management framework, NIST is engaging with interested stakeholders, including international partners. They held their first public workshop on this framework recently, with over 800 participants joining the meeting. They also released a public request for information about this AI risk management framework, which received over 100 responses. Those responses have been published online, along with an analysis of them. Some common themes from the respondents include the importance of defining common AI terminology for communicating risk, of recognizing the impact of AI on society, of supporting a framework structure that documents organizational goals and applies an outcome-based approach to achieve them, working toward an overarching governance system for AI, and the need for consistent metrics and other means of measuring and communicating performance. The public responses highlight the fact that there's a significant amount of existing foundational work on which to build an AI risk management framework. The responses also reflect a variety of views about what constitutes risk and trustworthiness. To help drive discussions around AI risk management, NIST has also proposed a draft taxonomy of AI risk. Their taxonomy aims to simplify the categorization of risks so that stakeholders can better recognize and manage them. We look forward to continuing multi-stakeholder engagement on this effort so that we can have another tool available to the AI community for furthering the development and use of beneficial AI in a responsible manner.
Quick word before you actually go, because I know you spend most of your career in the field, of course, of artificial intelligence when it comes to innovating and researching into it. How do you see the articulation or crossing between regulation and innovation? Because of course, it's going to be a major question out here on this panel.
So first, if we think about AI innovation, I think it's important to recognize that many of the AI innovations that we're benefiting from today have derived from decades of research and development investments in AI. The United States continues to prioritize long-term AI research and development. And as I mentioned earlier, our first goal of our National AI Initiative is to continue to be a world leader in cutting-edge AI research. Many of our federal agencies in the United States have invested billions of dollars over the years to develop cutting-edge breakthroughs in AI that can solve difficult technical or societal challenges. An important segment of our AI research investments are going into large-scale AI research institutes, which bring multidisciplinary perspectives together to solve important grand challenges in AI. These institutes include many domain experts and industry partners, which will help accelerate the transfer of research advances into practical use. So as the research moves from the lab to practical application, we must ensure that it's always used in a responsible manner. In this context, the right regulation can actually spur innovation. It's clear that if people don't have trust in these technologies, then we're not going to be able to use them and provide benefits to society. So trust can come partially through governance, whether it be standards or evaluation tools or certifications or regulations and so forth. Certainly, there's a lot of deserved attention on the EU AI Act. From the United States perspective, it's clear that we have a good bit of common ground. The United States and the EU share a commitment to promoting AI that reflects our shared democratic values. Our regulators are focused on similar priorities: safety, fairness, non-discrimination, equity, and public trust. At the same time, we're eager to cooperate to help advance the practical implementation of some of the ideas put forth in the proposed regulation. For example, many of the requirements in the proposed EU AI Act, while sensible in principle, do not yet provide companies with the clear guidance they need to effectively implement them. In some cases, companies may be required to certify or prove that an application meets a standard that's highly difficult to measure or precisely define. This imposes a significant compliance burden that will be especially acute on smaller companies. So as the legislation progresses through negotiations, it will be important to maintain its risk-based, innovation-friendly approach. And it will be critical to ensure that companies have clear guidance that they need to implement and observe the provisions of the Act appropriately. So to conclude, the United States is eager to work with our international partners as discussion on AI regulation proceeds. It's important for like-minded democracies to come together and consider the right way to develop and govern the use of these technologies in a way that promotes responsible AI innovation, affirms democracies, and upholds the human rights that we believe so deeply in. So thank you very much.
And so are we, Lynn, in this global partnership on AI. Thank you so much for attending over the phone this conversation here. I know you have to run, so we'll let you run. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And now let's dive into the discussion out there because as you heard, of course, Lynn was just stating the fact that the United States are dying to, try to work more and more closely with our partners on artificial intelligence regulation. Of course, we'll hear maybe first from Thomas Hahn, actually, so still online and over Zoom. Expectations and of the industrial sectors are high when it comes to better understand how to foster smarter regulation around AI and how to use AI just per se. What are actually your thoughts on what's coming up from the industrial sectors in terms, again, of expectations out there?
Okay, many thanks to be participating, and I hope you can see me and hear me.
We can.
I think we can, that's great. And I have only to explain a little bit. I sent to you up front 2 slides, maybe when you can show this and I can explain it. If not, I make it without the slides. When you're speaking from industry, I'm coming from Siemens. Yes, you see here the slide, perfect. And when you're looking on the right side, you see here some kind of examples of application fields. Meaning we have on the one side optimization of processes in, let's say, normal industries, but also in regulated industries where you have to apply also some kind of regulation. Think about when you are in healthcare environment or when you have, a mobility train system or something else. So meaning we are using today, and this is also what we want to have, and a lot of words were said before from Lynn, is that we have to have a safe, secure, trusted, trustworthy AI applications. which we have to do, which we have to look at it. And when you're looking at the left side of the slide, you see some kind of the AI application fields, meaning, from design, from simulation, from optimization of processes, up to the detection when you have to check something in order to pick up some topics. Also meaning, as an industrial company or representative of an industrial company, to use AI, it's today a fact in a regulated and non-regulated industry, to make it trustworthy, robust, safe. We have also some kind of functional safety is an absolute need. And therefore, to have this risk base and also, like Lynn mentioned, use case oriented approach, depending on the application field, we as a company are in favor in. We are looking what together, with all of us, let's say, what standards are existing. Think about machine regulation, functional safety or something else to get it, let's say, trusted, secure and safe. That's maybe the perspective from the company, but I'm also representing here today an initiative, a non-profit organization. Maybe we just go to the next slide, please. We have here also some kind of non-profit association where, besides Siemens, also other companies and academias and association are included inside. And when you're looking at the top, for sure, our topic is to look reading the strategy, AI strategy, in a nutshell, to support this digital transformation and how we are doing this. So this is on the bottom. We have established frameworks. You see this with the partnership of the AI data and robotics, for example. AI, Lynn mentions this, is several years old. I've also done this at the university, but now with the possibility of connectivity to get the data, to calculate the data, to get value out of the data, to create impact in a trusted, safe and secure way. That's what we are driving forward also as an association. And now maybe to the right side of the picture, what I'm always in favor in to have this holistic view from the calculation, HPC, processors, data infrastructure, where, for example, this initiative from Guy XI coming inside. The value part where BDVA, the Claire, the Alice, the initiative are coming together and to create impact. Here I've mentioned only two, let's say, industry segments, but you can imagine that this going over to health, agriculture and other verticals. Meaning we have to have this complete picture in mind to get together with the experts which we can provide and trusted, safe and secure. A lot of things were said before from Lynn. Inclusive AI application, especially like you can mention in industry where I'm coming from, because anyway, we have to take care that our systems not hurting people, are running safe and are running in a trusted and also transparent way. But we can discuss later about what we are planning to make this AI application transparent, so that is also visible and understandable from the society. So that's as a short intro from my side. Many thanks.
Thank you so much, Thomas, and absolutely, we'll definitely dive into more from the industrial sector and from, any initiative you can update us on in a few minutes. But let's turn the mic to Kay, actually, because I know you have an incredible experience in AI as an expert in law, as a lawyer, of course. You do represent the World Economic Forum on this stage. What are the possible touch points between the World Economic Forum and GPI when it comes to better fostering regulation?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. And just to tell you a little bit about the World Economic Forum, I was part of the Asilomel Principles many years ago now. It's sort of ancient history. But since moving to the forum in 2017, so for the last 4 years, what we've been doing at the forum is really looking at how you operationalize principles. We've got lots of principles. We actually had to know how governments, business can really think about operationalizing those. So if we go to slide 1, we have always worked in a multi-stakeholder fashion. The forum has about 700 industrial members, but also government members from all around the world, and business and academia and civil society. It's really important when you're thinking about how do you operationalize principles around responsible AI, that you do create these multi-stakeholder groups. And so if we go to the next slide, these are just a few of the projects we've been working on over the last few years. What we try to do is we try to look for a place where the forum is uniquely able to move the ball. And also over these years, we've brought now together 17 different governments to set up network centers, also thinking about AI policy and operationalizing the work. And so, you know, where can we make a difference? And also, we don't think just about about sort of coming up with some principles. We do a landscape review. We then create the tools, and then we test it, because we know that we're not going to come up with best things in the first iteration. So we iterate it for 6 months of testing. And then the idea is to scale it. So scaling it across the world in companies or amongst governments. And I think that's a great way that we can think about partnering with GPay. And so just as some examples, the chatbot project. How do you operationalize principles in AI chatbots in healthcare? We have tested that in India, and now we're testing it in Rwanda as well, so that maybe we can begin to serve some of these underserved populations in terms of healthcare. Thinking about smart toys and how our children are going to be working with smart toys, learning from AI, and then working with AI. It's a sort of continuum. Nobody was really looking at that before UNICEF, and we made this partnership, and now, you know, we're doing some really important work in this area. So, facial recognition and law enforcement. Although many people want to ban it, there are countries and police forces around the world who will be using it. So we've just created some best practices with Interpol, UN, UNICRI, and police forces to really help us think. And we're now in that piloting stage. So, you know, anybody who wants to be involved in any of this work, please do come forward, join us, because it's important that we work together. Slide 3, please. These are the sort of things that we have been doing. So you can see there's policy recommendations for governments, but there's also best practice tools for companies. And last slide, please. So this year, we set up something that we call the Global AI Action Alliance, or GAIA for short. What we saw was that there was lots of great work being done by lots of great people out around the world, but there was nowhere where everybody came together. And so we wanted to create this umbrella organization that everybody could have a home within. And so, you know, we're delighted to participate in this summit and very much value the fact that GPay has decided to create these partnerships. The forum's planning to work closely with GPay on amplifying the outputs of the working groups through the forum's ecosystem of partners. We really believe that cross-fertilization and multi-stakerism can move the work into practice. And so we're delighted to be joining today. We think that it will help us come up with concrete proposals to submit to GPay and the working groups about how we can work together. And we look forward to sharing knowledge and doing that work in partnership. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Speaking actually of partnerships and collaboration, Lucilia, you're definitely representing here at DG Connect for the European Commission. And something's cooking, actually, at the European Commission level. Of course, it's the AI Act. How do you approach it right now?
Thank you very much for inviting me. So DG Connect is in the European Commission, the department that deals with digital policies. And artificial intelligence is one of those main policies that we have identified also for the digital decade, which means the next 10 years. And you may have noticed that the European Commission has put a lot of emphasis on digital also after the pandemic. For the Recovery Fund, that we have set a target of 20% of the Recovery Fund to be spent in digital, and I really hope that much of this funding also goes to AI technologies and their development in the European countries. So everybody talks about the AI Act, and I will too today, but I just want to remind that, well, the European Commission has been working on AI for a few years, and the Act is part of a larger package which was adopted last year. And in this package, we address, on the one hand, an ecosystem of excellence, which is a set of policy measures in support of the development of AI. So we support research, foundational research, industrial research, through the public-private partnership that Thomas Hahn reminded, for example. Testing and experimentation facilities, so the testing environment for AI, for us, it's very important. And we have a number of measures on skills and digital competencies in AI. And we do a lot of work with our member states through a coordinated plan. And I'm very glad to see that many European countries have joined GPI. I think 5 of them yesterday, so good European representation. Thank you very much. On the Act, we, of course, have developed an ecosystem of excellence, but we think that the other side of the coin is the ecosystem of trust, that we cannot become a hub of leading developments and use of AI unless we are able to create a better ecosystem for trust. And so we have developed, together with a high-level expert group that has been working with the European Commission for 2 years, the concept of trustworthy artificial intelligence. And what the regulatory framework does is to address, through a risk-based approach, the risk of artificial intelligence that some of the artificial intelligence applications bring, in particular in terms of possible violation of fundamental rights and safety. And the Act is the first comprehensive regulatory framework proposed at the global level. As I said, it's risk-based, and it essentially requires certain conformity checks before the high-risk applications are put on the market. Just let me highlight before I close, we think it's important the regulatory frameworks are proportionate, and we very much focus on high-risk applications. We think that maybe most of AI applications are not risky, do not need to fall under rules. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'll let me throw the question actually to the UK part of this panel here. Of course, you're part of the ICO. How do you approach AI, though, in terms of regulation?
Firstly, just to say bonjour. Tout d'abord, merci de m'avoir invité. Merci à nos hôtes et au public. So firstly, I hope the French language speakers will forgive my pronunciation. It's my eternal regret that I did not learn to speak French. But I benefit from technology that allows me to describe what I want to say in English and have that translated into French. And that technology was really built upon the requirements around data and having access to data to train the models and algorithms that enable that technology. So I gain great personal value, benefit, and utility. But I also, as a user, as a citizen, have some key requirements. I expect that that technology is really delivering that utility for me without compromising my requirements around my trust in this technology and my broader fundamental rights and the rights I have under different requirements under the law. I should explain, I work for the UK Information Commissioner's Office. We are the independent UK authority established to uphold information rights and the data protection requirements for UK citizens. And really our role is to make sure that the use of personal data in technologies such as the one I've just described is acting in the citizens' best interest. So I think, to answer your first part of your question, I think that's the first thing to really focus on, which is how do we, when we're thinking about a human-centric approach to AI regulation, really recognize what it means to put the citizen, the user, at the heart of those decisions. And in doing so, I think there is ample opportunity to amplify those opportunities for innovation and utility. But we must also really recognize what it means to develop responsible AI approaches. And our role is to really help clarify that word responsibility. So how do, whether it's industry partners, whether it's other organizations, academics, others, how might they go about really understanding what the law requires when it comes to recognizing the particular things you need to do to demonstrate responsibility? And that's critical, because without responsibility, I think you cannot engender and foster trust. The benefits around AI will not be realized if we don't create the environment to create a trustworthy response from citizens to the use of these technologies. We need to be really careful that we are focusing on that. I think yesterday's presentations, which really talked about the critical need for the use of these technologies in healthcare or in climate response, really demonstrated that. So what do we do here in the UK as the ICO? There are a range of different pieces of work we have done that intersect between personal data, privacy, and AI. Everything from clarifying what it means to interpret data protection and AI, so we have guidance out there. We are building a risk toolkit designed both to help our own assurance and supervision teams to investigate the use of AI in case there are issues of harm to citizens, but also designed to allow organizations to have clarity around how they can build confidence in their own development. And it's out there. You can go online right now and see the beta version, and we'll be launching the full version in the next month or two. But building on that, we are also recognizing that there is an opportunity to really help organizations really think about how to co-design their approaches by making those approaches user-centric. I can, later on in the conversation, describe what we have done during the height of COVID around contact tracing responses, but also around how to apply the UK Children's Code by some work that we've done to engage designers to co-design their approaches to help businesses. And I'm really pleased to say, we only learned this last night, the Information Commissioner's Office has just won 2 design awards which were presented to us by industry, by designers, for the quality of that user experience design work. But I want to close out with just a couple of perspectives. I think it's very important that we think longer term around what it means to address some of the issues that the data governance panel were raising around the fears and the hopes and the aspirations of citizens around justice, around having transparency and fairness drive the developments that we are talking about today. And I think part of the role of our authority and what the Information Commissioner does is to really emphasize that we are there to help navigate those issues around power inequalities, equities, fairness questions, but to do so recognizing that there are no inherent challenges to industry leveraging the immense power of AI if we can really think through what it means to place the citizen at the heart of that process right from the beginning. I think that's one of the things that we are focusing on very proactively to try and enable industry to have clarity around how to do that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, because yes, at the end of the day, we're all over 24 hours either users, citizen, or producers of these artificial intelligences. Thank you so much for reminding us of this very crucial point here. Young, how about Singapore? How do you approach AI regulation there?
Yeah, can I have my slides up, please? Yeah, thank you for the opportunity for us to share a bit about how we are looking and thinking about this area. I'd like to just start by explaining why did we start looking at AI governance. And it's really a point that resonates with what Lynn and Ali said. About 2018, that's when we started looking at this area. And the key thing was really, how do we build consumer trust? Because without consumer trust, you won't have consumer participation and use of such technology, which at that point in time was starting to make its way in a very immersive manner into a lot of products and services that we're using. So the way we looked at it was that if you want to provide a good governance in this area, we need to do 3 things. The first thing that we need to do is to articulate a set of principles The second thing we need to do is to provide tools that will help the organizations that are putting AI into products and services to be able to implement and comply with these principles. The third thing we need to do is to have the ability to assess that these principles have been implemented well and there's compliance, right? And the presentation I'm about to make will follow this track. So principles, how did we articulate those principles? What we did was actually to basically put the human in the center. How do you put the consumer in the center, and how do you take existing principles like accountability, data privacy, and fashion it into a framework that allows organizations to implement a good governance when they're putting AI into practice. So that's the method, right? We put out our model AI governance framework. And the next step that we did, right, was to see how we could provide the tools to help organizations translate these principles into practice. This is where we started collaborating with the WEF, Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and we provided the companion self-assessment guide, which was a checklist, right, that allowed organizations to go through and to make sure that they had interpreted and implemented those principles in the right manner. We were also conscious that at this stage in the adoption of AI, a lot of organizations may not have the expertise, and they need to look at good examples that can inspire and that can encourage. So we worked with organizations, both domestic and foreign, abroad, right? And we came up with 2 volumes of a compendium of use cases. And these are organizations that were prepared to say that, look, this is my process, and this is how I believe my process implements your principles. So these were the tools that we put together to help our organizations implement. Next slide, please. Of course, the model framework cannot stand still. In the course of the last 3 years, we've seen it adapted for various other sectors. So while the initial one was a general framework, we've seen colleagues from the Ministry of Health adopt it for use in healthcare. We've worked closely with our regulators of the financial industry to ensure that their principles will also integrate well with our governance framework for the financial sector. And even as we speak, there are other sectors that have started to adapt these principles. Next slide, please. Well, I'm going to skip over this, right? The one statement I want to make was that as we were developing the principles for our governance framework, quite coincidentally and quite happily, it turned out that we were also in compliance with the OECD AI principles. So it won't be surprising to hear that Singapore also adheres to the OECD AI principles. Next slide, please. The work that we are currently doing now is the third stage. So principles, tools for implementation, how do we start looking at giving ourselves the ability to ensure that there is adequate compliance, and these things can be independently assessed, right, and verified. That's something that we've started work on. We're developing a governance testing framework. What we've done is to, very fortunately for us actually, there is a lot of convergence in this area of AI principles, and we were able to comprehensively look at the various types of principles out there, and we designed a 4-stage, right, framework for AI testing, right, and certification of good AI governance. So that's a work in progress, and we'll hope to be able to share more once we get beyond the pilot stage. Last slide, please. So this is the journey so far, and we believe that this is round about the time where we can start thinking about how do we take the next step? Do we regulate? How should we think about regulation, right? And what aspect do we need to do? So I just end off with just sharing a few thoughts, right? I think that we need to understand the context of AI regulation. AI is going to touch our lives. So speaking as a lawyer, there are other questions we need to clarify relating to criminal liability, civil liability, right? But those things actually goes beyond, is outside the remit of AI governance and AI regulation. So for us, it's really, once you've established that an organization has to be responsible and is liable, how do you ensure that it acts responsibly and is able to put in place a good governance structure to be responsible? And that's the role of AI governance, right? The questions we think about is really, what's the approach? Do we have a comprehensive set of AI regulation, or do we take a data-driven approach, collecting evidence and data about which are the areas where there are issues around AI governance, and then making a decision to see whether we need to strengthen those areas by introducing regulation. And of course, regulation, we have the whole spectrum of soft to hard regulation. So I think that's the stage of our thinking right now. We need to proceed progressively, incrementally, right? And build our way up from voluntary regulation, self-regulation, to eventually maybe very specific obligations that you need to have black letter law regulation. So thank you for the opportunity for me to share a bit about how we've thought about and how we are approaching this whole area.
Thank you so much for this presentation. We're going to dive into the discussion part of our panel here because we want to try to understand how can regulation just stop doing some catch me if you can with innovation when it comes especially to those crucial tech such as AI here. Maybe first, Ali, you definitely touched upon this a few minutes ago, and Young, I really want to have your perspective also on this very first question when it comes to mitigating the risks of AI. Why personal data protection authorities should be competent regarding AI?
So I think, as I was touching on earlier, the development of AI technologies is already impacting our day-to-day lives. It's offering us immense opportunities to drive efficiencies and productivities, but also to tackle challenges that otherwise seemed impossible just a few years ago. But so much of the opportunity is intrinsically tied to the use of personal data. So while all AI use cases don't rely on personal data, many of the most critical and those that might represent the biggest risks to our societies when it comes to those questions around fairness and equity and the social covenant that we have as citizens to each other really do rely on questions around personal data. And for data protection authorities and for us as the Information Commissioner's Office, really one of the things that we do already is think around principles that transcend a particular technology. You know, GDPR, the other legislation that we look at is technology neutral. But we have to then take that legislation and understand the particular context of AI and how those risks might be amplified and what we can do to address those. And that's really around two purposes. The first one, in fact, Kin highlighted, is for us to be able to supervise and assess if there are emerging risks and to discharge our obligations, right, to make sure that we hold organizations to account where that is necessary and proportionate. And, you know, we're ready to do that. But most of the work that my group does and what we do is proactive. It's really around how do we help organizations identify, put in place plans to mitigate risks that they might identify, and really gain that confidence to develop these amazing tools and technologies, not only with their own interests in mind, but the best interests of their consumers, users, and, as I said, citizens. And so the risk toolkit work that we are doing is anchored in our guidance on AI, and it's very practically orientated. It's really designed to allow risk practitioners, product teams, data science teams, and others to really pick up that toolkit and start to work through, well, what do I do to really work through the challenges I'm facing in my context? So these approaches will always be a living approach. It needs to evolve. As the developments and issues that emerge from AI develop and evolve. But I think recognizing that we take a principles-based approach gives us that confidence that many of the approaches that we are outlining have the flexibility and the adaptability to be able to keep pace with the issues that are emerging.
Absolutely. Young, actually, you definitely also mentioned the fact that societal risks were definitely at the heart of the ideation. You were actually, improving on how to better regulate AI in Singapore. You mentioned it as a lawyer. So, yeah, again, why should data protection regulatory bodies have a better understanding on how to, see how AI can be regulated?
Well, my answer to that is actually very simple, right? If you look at it, a lot of the AI that we interact with will be on our electronic digital devices, right? And if it is on our digital devices, then it's going to be using some form of personal data, whether it is in the initial stage during production or at later stage as input data so that it can perform well. So for that reason, data protection authorities have to be involved in this space. But I have a second reason for that, right? Which is that our experience shows that the approach that you take to implementing good governance around AI can actually be inspired and can actually be adapted from data protection best practices. Because essentially what you are talking about is corporate responsibility. How do you put in place a good corporate governance to make decisions at the right level? We need to talk about good quality data, where you're getting it from, right? And good data management practices, right? And this is where, especially if you're using personal data, how do you strike the right balance between using anonymized, pseudonymized data maybe at the earlier stage during production, while when you're doing testing and debiasing, you might actually have to end up using some form of personal data. But how, if those are the issues, then data protection authorities have the ability to provide guidance and support to make sure data is used responsibly, used proportionately and well, to ensure models are very well developed. And finally, a lot of data protection is about the communication between an organization and the consumer. What level of transparency, what amount of information are you providing to enable the consumer to build trust in you? So that is, again, something that you can adapt from data protection practices, right? Right amount of information to encourage a casual consumer to actually use your product and services, but then enough information to demystify and allow a existing customer to understand why is this product providing this particular behavior for me, and how can I change it and affect it so that it performs better for me. So these are all principles that data protection authorities are familiar with, and that's the second reason why I think that data protection authorities have a role to play in this area.
And actually, a lot of these data are definitely used in autonomous systems, AI-powered critical systems too. Let me turn the question to Thomas here, because of course there's a lot of concerns raised either by consumers or governments on how industry is actually tackling autonomous systems use. So how can you, I mean, I'm pretty sure that you've already thought about the end game here. So what are your thoughts on this matter?
Start a little bit what is driving us. Some of the aspects I have addressed at the beginning. I think we will not have a big difference in what said before. And then I'm telling a little bit how we implement this. What is driving us, when I give you maybe a simple example, when you have trained an AI system to recognize a dog or a cat, and a mouse is coming into the picture, maybe is identified as a dog or a cat, which of course in our environment, and I'm speaking for manufacturing industries, is a no-go, so to say, because we have to implement AI in a trustworthy, robust, safe, and reliable way, even unknown situations. So meaning this is what are driving us, this was the aspect from the manufacturing, but you can also expand this to the societal aspects. That's the reason why we are very keen in the safety standards, which we have to use, machine regulations, and have to look at the gap, what is now happening with AI. I give you an example again here. When you have some machine learning algorithm which changes the behavior of the machine over the lifetime for good reasons, because the machine is more efficient, producing higher quality or what else. But the machine is theoretically different what you have commissioned at the beginning. So, and this is the topics where we are looking inside how we can do this for the manufacturing industry. But as you said before, you can also expand this to the society. What we are doing, second part, first of all, I think this is obvious. Nobody can do it alone, also not a single company, not coming from industry or from academia or government or other stakeholders, communities. Nobody can do it alone. So therefore, what we are doing and we are working with, and the pity that I am not today in Paris in person, but because we started also with Confiance AI, some initiative. So we developed an AI framework. And this AI framework, we are covering the technology, machine learning, sensoric. We are looking how we can scaling up AI, meaning also how we are building a community, especially with the small and medium-sized enterprise, to use this AI, but also how we can achieve this trusted AI topic, which discussed before. So we have an framework where we're working with. And this, of course, is combined with maturity, AI maturity tools, with tools to get the trusted AI topics, also all what is discussed before. But maybe I want only to highlight one aspect, because also the trust in AI from society is a target. We have to look also how we can make it visible in which AI system you are confronted with. So we are looking at a trusted AI level, which on the one side can be implemented from small and medium size, big companies, everybody was developing this, but on the other side, who can also be recognized from the society. So you're seeing from the system immediately, is this a system following some kind of rules, which we discussed before, and so on. So we are working with others, with academia, let's say on an AI label, which is very close, which you know maybe for the energy labels that you have this classification A, B, C, D, you know, all the risk classes, and you can recognize is the system tested in this environment or not, and it's visible that you create trust. So that's only to give you a short overview about what we are doing and what is driving us.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Lucilia, actually, so let's put it this way, if you may. The European Commission sometimes seems to be a little more risk adverse than risk happy, but you definitely have a risk-based approach, especially when it comes to this AI upcoming regulation, or actually act. I know that also every single piece of regulation coming up from DG Connect right now are mixed and matched with a lot of different layers when it comes to the European Commission acts. For instance, the Green New Deal is definitely the base of everything that is thought and brainstormed today at the European Commission level to try to better regulate various different markets and technologies. We can also think about Next Generation EU, which is also impacting on the regulation you are producing right now. So how can we think better about the way you are going to regulate AI on a risk-based approach if we're thinking about the impact on the environment or on various different parts of what AI is actually doing to our lives?
We have, when we were preparing the Act on AI, we have been very often reflecting on how we could have included the environmental aspect in it. And in the particular proposal we made, we did not, simply because we think that it would be very complicated to implement, because we are still not able to measure the impact of AI on the environment. And here you have to think that there are always two dimensions. There is the impact of the technology when the technology is applied to an application that is actually good for the environment. And then there is an impact of the AI itself, because AI consumes a lot of energy. And so, the very big applications obviously are not very environmental friendly, although they can be very friendly from other points of view, because of course they can give us a lot of benefits. So there is these two aspects that are very difficult to combine if you are reflecting in a context of measurement but still we very much support ideas like the one that has just been expressed by Thomas, for example. If voluntarily there could be industry associations that implement labels that are able really to measure and to reflect the impact of that particular AI application on the environment is very welcome. Now, in the context of the design of our regulation, this has not been taken into account because our regulation essentially is mostly looking at the risk of violation of fundamental rights and safety. And so it has been looking more at rights such as non-discrimination and democracy. And of course, you can extend all this to the environment, but it becomes a very complicated way of implementing the particular act. Which, as I said, it's risk-based, meaning that it is based on, we always represent it with a pyramid. The pyramid that reflects different levels of risk. And for us, as I said earlier, most of the AI applications don't carry any risk. And so we like to see these green, let's say, applications at the bottom of our pyramid. And as we move up the pyramid, of course, we increase the level of risk. And we are particularly concerned with applications that we call high risk, that differently from GDPR, we actually want to define in the annex to the Act. So we identify the list of high-risk use cases because we don't want companies to have to think, oh my God, is this application risky, yes or not, and make the assessment by themselves. We want to be able to identify that list of use cases from the start. And to also, in the future, maybe having to expand it, but in the context of very precise governance system with a group of experts advising us, with member states, with the Data Protection Authority, at the European level as well. We do have a very limited number of applications that we consider so risky that we prohibit, like social scoring, for example. And this is the top of our pyramid. But so we think that our risk-based approach is essential to make any regulation of AI proportionate, limiting also a negative impact it may have on innovation, and very much limited to where it's needed. And I'm glad to hear, and Lynn Parker said it earlier, in other parts of the world, like the United States, we agree on this risk-based approach. This was also reflected in the statement made by the Trade and Technology Council between the European Union and the United States, most recently at Pittsburgh.
Thank you so much. We'll pace it up, if you may, because time flies by on this very stage, to the human-centered AI approach. But I want to throw the ball to Thomas, maybe on this very simple question. You definitely mentioned explicable AI in your introduction. Frankly, is it a burden for innovation, or is it realistic paradigm?
Yeah, the explainable AI is really somehow in an early stage. We have to, and that's the reason why I mentioned also that we have to cooperate with research with all of us to get it solved. Because with explainable AI, we are thinking to get, let's say, also AI black box, whereas we have the AI data model inside. Modeling of the data, what previously discussed, to the domain experts to judge on this, is a system running in the right way or wrong way to achieve what we have discussed before. So meaning in our views, a lot of R&D have to be done still in this topic to open, let's say, this black box for the AI, for domain experts, to get the explainability, and that's the reason why this. As we thinking that there are some promising topics, I see it not as a hurdle for us. For sure, there have to be a lot to do, because when this is be solved and you have an AI-trained mechanism with data, you can offer some kind of hints for the domain experts, how the temperature is changing, how the behavior of a train is changing when this algorithm is calculated in this box. And you make it visible. I think that could be to make it explainable, not visible, make it visible and explainable. That's the reason why I think this explainable AI is promising, but we have to be aware also still early way forward. But maybe it could be also a topic where we can solve some of the issues or to get some trust from the technical perspective in the area.
Yeah, again, it's always about trust in the end. Thank you so much, Thomas. As we're actually bringing into the discussion the industry, let me take another part of this ecosystem to the floor with UK, if you may. I'm thinking about big tech here, because of course they are the very first to move to the field of ethical AI when it seems to be the right idea and the right move. But sometimes they can be kind of lost, in their thoughts when it comes to implementing it. So to be, again, a little bit honest here and frankly, do you think big tech are really trustworthy when it comes to actually better fostering with regulatory bodies, with governments, this idea that, ethical AI and a regulation is needed? Can we trust GAFAMs, Beatics, on to really implement the regulation you guys are designing here?
Was that directed at, I thought you...
Yeah, 4K.
Okay.
Sorry, I was like...
Sorry, yes. Well, it's hard because it's important that we trust one another and we work together in a way that is multi-stakeholders, so that everybody actually involves themselves in the process. I think that what we can see is that a number of companies have actually developed guidelines. And so we've been working with a number of those companies to actually say to them, okay, so you've developed these ethical principles, you've developed a way of implementing them throughout your company. Why don't you let us expose these principles, these ways of operationalizing it to the world so that we can actually see whether we can help you make them better, and then we can produce them so that other companies that don't have the resources that you have can actually use those. And so far we've done that with Microsoft. We produced a case study back in February with Microsoft, and just a couple of months ago we did the same piece of work with IBM. And so, as I say, these are companies that are saying, this is what we've produced, but actually then we are bringing this multi-stakeholder group together to test that, help them do better, and then help this be available for small and medium-sized businesses, for example, that don't have the money to put into this work. And, also to help companies that are not what we call AI companies. So companies, that are becoming AI companies because they're having to deploy AI throughout their company, but are actually in the healthcare sector or in the energy sector, etc. I could go on. So I think that we are seeing companies being much more open. And I think that we are seeing open source tools being created. The work that we did with Singapore, for example, that was again based around how do companies think about getting trained, think about all this internal work that they have to do. So we are certainly seeing an uptick of our members wanting to know about AI and wanting to be involved in thinking about what are those internal processes. And, just also, we've just started some work around AI as part of ESG, and that really brings VCs into it and investors. So I sort of see it as a pincer movement where, you know, if we can get VCs to ensure that young companies do it right and investors to make sure that the other companies are doing it right, then we can really make a difference.
I'm pretty sure that a lot of, the companies you've mentioned are really minding their words when it comes to implementing those regulatory frameworks. But still, Ali, in a way, should we fear a risk of ethical AI washing?
So I think just to build on that question, also by sort of picking up on some of the case points, I think we have to recognize that the scale of impact of AI technologies is significant. We again heard that through some of the sessions yesterday. And when you can reach billions of users globally, the impact you can have on their lives utilizing these sorts of technologies is so important that there has to be accountability. Now, that requires strong regulation. And I think it's really important that we do have clear and strong regulation. And it's really important to emphasize that strong regulation is not a barrier to innovation, right? And I really want to dispel this myth, and I would reject any assertion that it is. But strong regulation is also being called by some of these very companies who are really struggling with following through on the commitments that they've made. So it's really important to talk the talk around what responsibility means, but it's also important to walk the walk and be able to demonstrate that. And I guess what our role as a regulator is to clarify what the requirements are and then hold accountable organizations where it's important that we do that. And so those two aspects are really key. So let's pick a couple of examples. In the UK, at the moment, we are working closely with our regulatory partners at the Competition and Markets Authority. We are looking at the proposals by Google to deprecate third-party cookies and the wider impact and counter-proposals from industry. And there, we expect that there will end up being an agreement around the sorts of commitments and expectations we have, both as the Competition Authority, the CMA in the UK, and the ICO as the Privacy and Data Protection Authority, around what it means to ensure a good outcome for consumers from a competition and a privacy perspective. And that impact is likely to resonate globally, not only for UK citizens, but globally. And it's, that's something that we coordinate and work with other parties internationally on. The other side of that is making sure that we also can have confidence that organizations are following through on what they've committed. And part of that is about organizations being transparent and accountable to their consumers directly and making sure that they are really focusing on what it means to build trust with their consumers, but also for authorities such as us to be able to go and audit and assure and investigate where appropriate. And again, we take an approach very similar to what Zikin was saying earlier around really taking a measured approach to what that might mean. So we need to, again, create the space to engender trust. And I think that does require these different tools that regulatory authorities have to be applied. And in doing so, I think that what that really does is allows those who want to really deliver on what it means to develop responsible AI, for example, to do so with some confidence. And really what I hear very frequently when I speak to industry is that the guidance that we produce, the toolkits that we create, the conversations that we have such as this are helpful in providing industry confidence about what is the appropriate way to develop responsible technology use, especially when personal data comes in. And we follow through by making sure that organizations are given ample opportunity to do the right thing. And I think in a fast-paced, fast-evolving space such as AI, that's something we're going to have to carry on doing and make sure that we can respond to the pace of those innovations. But fundamentally, it also requires organizations to understand they have a role in being accountable to the citizen. It's part of the social covenant we all have with each other, that we will treat each other fairly and we will make sure those who are most vulnerable in our societies are protected from harms. And I think that's where organizations will hopefully step forward and do even more.
And sure, your work is not that easy when it comes to think better about those regulations. And also, you can have a crystal ball in the end at every single step of the regulation you can think ahead for. How can you cover the future of AI? Is it even possible to, when it comes to the European Commission, to Singapore, to the World Economic Forum, to the ICO, can you actually
I don't
think ahead.
want to hog the mic, but I'll just say a quick thing and then pass to colleagues who are super insightful on this. I think it's not necessarily about gazing into a crystal ball. We've talked about the privacy and data protection and information rights framework being principles-based. It's really asking, can we attest if something is fair, equitable? Can we attest whether the power dynamics between those who are being affected by a decision and those who are implementing that decision are accountable to each other? Are they accountable to the rule of law? And in doing so, can we create clarity for organizations around how to innovate and progress? And so we don't necessarily need to crystal ball this, but we do need to do two things. One is, where possible, co-design the right way to achieve good outcomes, right? And that includes the work that we have been doing here. It includes what Case described, Lucilla and others, and Zikin. And the reason that we have just won 2 awards issued by the design community for design guidance that a regulator has produced, as far as I know, that's the first time it's happened, is because the community of designers and product teams valued the approach that we took to helping them understand what they needed to do to comply with the Children's Code. So that's the first side of this. The second side is being responsive to the rapidly changing context of new technology developments. We use AI so broadly, but what we really need to recognize, there are a range of developments happening, and each of those might require a particular response to how you deal with issues, especially around privacy or data protection.
So, Lucilia, when you're thinking about your regulatory compass, let's put it this way, what's on the map? How can you think ahead about better regulation? And of course, I do understand right now, this is not always about catching up with the pace of innovation for sure, but do you just, draw this regulation and the next commission will fill in the blanks?
Oh, no, not at all. First of all, we are discussing the regulation in the European Council with all the member states. So this is going to continue, in my opinion, into next year, and we hope to finalize the discussion before the end of the year. It's with the European Council, and of course we'll have the discussion with the European Parliament as well, where I have to say that these two institutions tend to have some different views on the regulatory framework, so the debate is going to be very interesting indeed. But in your previous question on the capability of our regulatory frameworks to capture the future, first of all, I fully subscribe to what has just been said about a principle-based regulation. And secondly, I think that it's also important when one is writing a regulation to think of instruments in the regulatory process through which one can update a regulation relatively quickly. So we have, for example, written our list of use cases in an annex that we can then update through delegated acts, always talking to member states and the co-legislators, but in a much quicker way than when we have to review the full legislation, for example. The same goes for the definition of artificial intelligence. We have used a very general definition, which is based on the definition of the OECD, but then in Annex we try to include techniques that we use for AI, because these techniques will change over time, and we'll have the need to keep this definition kind of future-proof. So actually I would say that having a regulation that is future-proof in an innovative area like artificial intelligence is one of the most important challenges that a regulator has.
Thank you so much. We'll move on to your question, of course. Yeah, and we do have a question on the platform. I worry that as humans use AI more and more, humans become more dependent on AI, of course. Human autonomy would be reduced. My question is how to develop AI to help humans to become more independent from AI. Who wants to take this question first? Young, maybe? And Kay then? No?
I don't think I'm have the right expertise, but my initial response...
But you're a human, right?
Yeah, my initial response is actually, why do you need to develop AI to make you independent of AI? It's our choice, right? And I relate to change in behavior. In the older days, you turn on a browser, you have a few bookmarks, and you go to a few places where you read the news as they're coming on. Today, I realized that I've started to depend on Facebook to recommend suggestions. And after a while, I decided that that's not the right way. because it's giving me the same old things over and over again, and I found that I was not being exposed to new things. So I went back to bookmarks and I started looking again for a few nice websites that I will go to for my information. So you don't need AI. You need to make a decision and act on it.
Thank you so much, Kay.
Yes, certainly. So I do think there are a number of things that we can do. But I think it's also about looking at places where, we introduce AI, for example, to our children. And so it starts at that level. We know that our children are going to be working with AI, and we know that we're likely to be cared for by AI as well. So it's, that's why we're all here. That's why we need the soft law, the regulation, because we are setting today the answer to this question tomorrow. And so we need to be concentrating on those vulnerable groups, our young people, our old people, and also making sure that we build a structure where we get the benefits of AI, but we don't get those negativities. So I just think that the question is, that's why we're here. That's why we're trying to do it.
Exactly, and the reason why we're here is also to have your question answered. So I have plenty of hands right here right now, and the questions are bubbling. Let's go first to your question, sir.
All right, thank you. So I'm curious how you think about regulating AI in a more general fashion versus sector-specific regulations, and in that case, harmonizing among them. So in particular in the EU, in addition to the AI Act, you have the Digital Services Act's regulation of transparency and risks from content moderation and recommendation systems. So I'd love your thoughts on level of regulation and harmonization among them.
Ali, maybe first?
Sure, but I'm going to do that really annoying thing, which is answer a slightly different question. So I think if you recognize the role of the ICO, we're a full economy regulator because I think personal data manifests itself in many different sectors where organizations are really thinking about how to develop services for users. The way that we approach the sorts of issues you're describing are to make sure we are working in close collaboration with our sector-specific regulatory partners. So in the UK, we have established the Digital Regulation Cooperation Forum, the DRCF. So that was established by the ICO, the Financial Conduct Authority, the Competitions and Markets Authority, and Ofcom. And it's in that collaboration, recognizing that we need to work together while maintaining our independent jurisdictions and obligations, that we'll be able to tackle the sorts of issues that you're describing. So when it comes to the conversations around, say, for example, social media and content harm, it's clear that Ofcom will be taking the lead role around making assessments around how to deal with those challenges. But critical and key to that is also the role that personal data is playing in personalization and why you see those types of content and how organizations might need to respond to deal with that. So there is, through the DRCF, a joint work stream on algorithmic processing and looking at harms, but also our ability to attest and assure ourselves around what is happening. But we also have different examples where I've already mentioned the work with the CMA, but where we're also looking at by design more broadly. So how can we as different regulatory partners encourage a much more ex-ante, by design approach to help ecosystems and organizations understand from the get-go how to create structures that will help them achieve regulatory conformance and compliance with our respective regimes. So I think that's one of the approaches that we're taking, which is working in collaboration. And it doesn't just stay within the UK. So there is international collaboration. Zekin and I worked closely during the COVID pandemic around questions around contact tracing and the application there. We work with other data protection authorities and international authorities on a range of issues. So I think that's the approach that we take to try and identify the root causes of some of the issues that you're describing and how best to offer a 360 response to that. That's one of the things that we're working much more proactively on.
Sure. I just want to also out myself as a lawyer and so remind people that there is existing law out there that actually is coming to court at the moment. So there are issues around, for example, AI and loans and that bias question. There are issues around human resources and using AI that's already coming through the system, because most of our countries do have existing laws around this. And so often what we're doing is looking for places where we need to add to those existing laws. But I think, in the next couple of years, certainly in the United States, we will see case law in this area. And that will be very interesting because it's another aspect. So, law breaks down into a number of things. We've got regulators here, but also the courts. Certainly in common law countries, you'll see the law developing in this area. And so with human resources, for example, there are those robust laws, but then we're also working with Commissioner Sonderling at the EEOC in the United States to say, what is it about AI that we need to add law in? But I think that you should, when you're thinking about this work, really be looking at what's happening in the traditional legal space.
Thank you so much, Lucilia, and then we'll move on to the next question.
Yes, I mean, in the EU, because I think the question was very much about the EU regulation, where we build both on horizontal regulation like GDPR. So, for example, GDPR is already addressing some aspects of artificial intelligence. We don't repeat that, we just build on that. And for what concerns, for example, the recommender systems of the DSA, you will see that we do not address them in our AI Act. And if you look at the recitals of the Act, there is a recital that makes specific reference to the Digital Service Act and to the way the recommended systems have been regulated there. And then we had another need, which is how are we consistent with sectorial legislation in the European Union? And the choice that we have made of our regulatory instrument, looking at basically applying a CE marking system to artificial intelligence, means that we were able, through our Act, to influence directly all the legislation in the European Union, all the sectorial legislation that falls under what we call the new legislative framework, so Machinery Directive, Radio Equipment Directive, and so on. What we don't touch is the old sectorial legislation, like, for example, automotive legislation. There, when the automotive legislation is revised, they will have to adapt it to the AI rules. So we have this kind of two-stage system, but of course, in our impact assessment, the first exercise we have to do as regulators in the European Union is really to analyze all the existing legislation and see how you link to each one of them, and you have to prove it.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to the next question. There you go.
I'm sorry to ask another kind of parochial EU question, but given what Professor Parker said at the opening, I think this is relevant worldwide. And it also came up in the Latin American panel yesterday. My understanding, and I am outing myself as not a lawyer, but my understanding of risk-based approaches is that they're supposed to be continuums. But the EU has chosen to do this weird kind of a leveling thing, which I also, Ricardo complained about yesterday, and I also complained about in my commentary on the white paper, because it seems like some place for regulatory capture to occur. If we have all this fighting over, are we in this side of the threshold? So what kind of risk-basing do we want? Do we want a continuum, or why do we have these levels if that's the one that's better understood in law, or am I misunderstanding because I don't have enough law background?
Absolutely.
Well, when you write a piece of regulation, you also have to try to be as practical as you can. So our intention was to be very proportionate and being able to identify this list of high-risk use cases. And to be able to do that, we had to be able to capture certain aspects of risk that, in our opinion, kind of fall into that category of the pyramid. We could have had a continuum, but having a continuum would have meant, in my opinion, going then to companies and say, well, make your own assessment. Is your artificial intelligence application sufficiently risky to fall into these rules or not. And this creates a lot of legal uncertainty that for us was a little bit too dangerous to introduce on the European market. And that's why we had tried to be as specific as possible. Let me also say that this is what it's high risk for the European Union. I also, since we are talking in the GPI and in an international context, maybe we should also reflect whether the perception of risk is the same across different countries. Probably what's risky in the European Union is not risky in Singapore or more risky in the United States. I don't know. But this is, having this risk-based approach calls also for a need to have an international dialogue on what is risk and the perception of risk.
Thank you so much. Do we have another question? And it will be the final question of this session. Yeah, we do. And Thomas, if you want to jump in, just let us know if you want to answer one of the questions. Final question with you, sir.
Hi. Several interventions have approached the need to reach an AI that is trusted by the public, and there seems to be a general agreement that accountability is an important component of it. While other components of trustworthy AI, such as fairness and explainability, can, at least to a degree, be shown to have been addressed in an empirical way, accountability is much more difficult to define, track, ensure, and communicate, certify. So how do you envision that ensuring that a certain AI product satisfies the necessary accountability requirements will be in the future?
Please jump in if you want.
Yeah, I think that one of the reasons why I thought data protection authorities, right, actually have a role to play is that accountability is one of those principles that we know how to work with, we know how to look for, to make sure that there's evidence of accountability, and to make sure that the features are present. So I think it's a question of informing that how the accountability principles ought to be implemented when it comes to the use of data for AI. What are the key features that companies ought to have, and how do you provide evidence to show that you have these practices adopted? I think that those are the key things. And for enforcement, there are several ways. When things go bad, you investigate, you look for the evidence. If it's not there, then there's shortfall. Another possibility is certification systems. So you can have certification systems that regularly go in to audit to make sure that these evidence are present.
Thomas, maybe next.
Maybe, sorry, I'm not sure when I'm hearable. First of all, coming back to the question, that's exactly why we have this Trusted AI label, to make it visible, to make it doable, and of course visible to the society, what I explained before, what I referred to as this energy label, which we're looking if you can adapt this in a comparable way, adapted way, also for this AI labeling topics. So it's a one comment to this, and maybe only to Lucilla's comment regarding the risk classes. I think from industry's perspective, it gives also a framework where we can work in it, and it's also a benefit for us. And we know all that we have to develop this further together. Also, these risk classes or not a continuum, like discussed, helps us companies, especially the small and medium size, to category, to get a framework where they can act, let's say, in a secure way inside.
Thank you very much. Kay, final words.
Yeah, I was just going to add that, we all talk about we need to take the general public with us, but also we should be thinking about the fact that everybody works for a government, everybody who works for a company is part of the general public. And so the more we can do when we are implementing AI systems in government or in companies is actually to ensure that we have complete training of members of those organizations to understand AI, to understand the way that their organization is using AI, so that that's one of the ways that we actually build trust from the inside. The other thing that we did was we worked with the government of New Zealand to actually describe the way that you can have a national conversation about implementation of AI. And, New Zealand's a small country, but it's providing a framework for other people to take to have those conversations. Because unless we start bringing people into the conversation, we won't ever, to my mind, really create that trust, whether we regulate, whether we have court cases, etc. So, let's think about all of us as those members of the public and our duty to make sure that we talk to people as well.
And New Zealand is quite an outstanding example in so many ways indeed. Ali, final words.
Thank you. Well, I was going to answer that question just to sneak in some final remarks as well, so I'll confess that. I think I don't have much more to add to what Zekin said about the way that data protection authorities can really help provide a framework for how you can build up accountability. So everything Zekin said stands and I think was excellent. But I think having listened to the GPI conversations of the last 2 days, I think it's really important that we bring into the decisions around the development of AI and the impact of AI on citizens, those who are going to be affected. So this was really prevalent around conversations around bringing in the Global South, but I think it applies to those communities, whether they're vulnerable, marginalized, or have significant power imbalances in our societies. They need to be part of the conversation around what does it mean for them to have confidence and trust, but also accountability in the way that they can engage with that accountability. So I think that's really important. And really, one thing that came, at least to my ear, what I heard yesterday, was that there seems to be this view that there's an inherent tension between being able to realize the rights of citizens between the opportunities that AI might afford. And I think we need to really, as GPI, dispel that and really challenge that. And rather than accept that there needs to be this, in my view, a false dichotomy between making sure citizens have access to their rights or they can have access to some developments in AI as an opportunity, we need to dispel that dichotomy view and present this as a reconciliation of those objectives. And I say that as an engineer. So for an engineer, being provided with how might we deliver on the value and the promise of AI while ensuring that citizens' rights are protected and they are treated equitably and fairly, is a great challenge to receive. For innovation, that is what those who are really promoting developments in AI will look for. So I would say that's, from me, a closing remark, which is we need to move away from these false dichotomies into one where we reconcile what might appear to be competing objectives.
We are digital citizens in the end. Thank you so much, Ali, Kay, Zeking, Lucilia, and Thomas for those perspectives you've been diving in over the past 90 minutes. I guess they definitely deserve some applause too, because it's been a tough, discussion here on stage.